The major news inside the United States now is the decision by Donald Trump to essentially wash his hands of the Kurdish forces inside of Syria. And now, as a result, Turkey announced that it was going to begin a military operation against those same Kurds. And as of this recording, at least several bombings have been carried out against Kurdish positions. Now, the position of the Turkish government is that the Kurds are a terrorist organization as they carry out bombings against many civilian targets, including busloads of people inside of Turkey. Now, the United States has been using the Kurds as a proxy force since the assault on Syria began 7, 8 years ago now. And until then, the United States has been giving material support to the Kurdish forces to act on behalf of U.S. interests. Now, when I originally reported this, and I reported that there was a U.S. airbase inside of Kurdish territory, even providing pictures of it, it was denied and claimed that I just made it up. Then, when the U.S. and the Kurds openly became allies in the public, it was, of course, through mental gymnastics by many libertarian socialists as somehow okay. Even I've engaged in debates on it, as you recall, with socialism or barbarism, in which I said the Kurds are allying with imperialism against Syria, to which socialism or barbarism said, and I quote, "I do not care." Now, this is what I warned of from the beginning, and not just me, but many other people as well, that you cannot trust the United States. After all, it was previously the United States who came to the Kurds inside of Iraq and said that if they rose up against Saddam Hussein, the U.S. military would support them. Then, when they did, the United States was nowhere to be found, and then as a result, a German company, a fact that likes to get forgotten, sold poisonous gas to Saddam Hussein, which he then went on to use to attack the Kurds, killing roughly 200,000 of them. I believe that that's the most common estimate as to the number of fatalities. In other words, they already knew they couldn't trust the United States, yet they did it anyway. Basically, the problem stems that the Kurds are not powerful enough to make a claim to a homeland. They don't have the military or economic power to do so. Thus, they ally themselves with anybody they can find, even if it is the primary imperialist power in the world. And it's interesting to note that people really, really insist that the Kurds are socialists, even though they're literally not. And then I even showed essentially their constitution that guarantees the right to private property, which is kind of the opposite of socialism. Unless China does it, then all of a sudden it's socialist again. But I digress. The Kurds have never acted as socialists, ever. And I think that's pretty obvious from literally everything that they've done. Nobody can literally act as an agent of the United States and call themselves socialists, to which many anarchists in their complete ignorance on the matter proclaimed Mao to be an ally to U.S. imperialism because he took guns from them to fight the Japanese. Of course, what they don't seem to understand, because they didn't take 10 seconds of thought, was that there's a difference between taking weapons from imperialists to fight other imperialists and to fight and make your own land independent. There's a difference between that and literally being owned by the United States to carry out their interests. That distinction simply could not be made by the group, the particular anarchists, not all of them said this, on that situation. Now, it's become very clear that not only were the Kurds used as a proxy force by the United States to fight the Syrian government, or I mean fight ISIS, but they were also used to occupy oil-rich lands that belonged to the Syrian government. And then once that was fully carried out, and this is something you can research, you can find this, I'm not making it up. The only person authorized to sell that oil that's in the Kurdish region, or the now Kurdish occupied region, was an Israeli Mossad agent. Now, not to mention, there's a ton of other things that happened too. Like the ethnic cleansing Kurds were carrying out. They were kicking ethnic Arabs out of their homes, stealing those homes, and giving them to Kurds. Now, I know the libertarian socialists like to pretend this never happened, but it did. And there's a ton of reports showing it happened. There are tons of people coming forward showing it happened. There is video of them doing it. In other words, all the actual proof you would need, all of it ignored by the mainstream media. Now, the mainstream media doesn't deny that it happens. They just don't report on it because you're not lying if you don't say anything. And that's a very common tactic for a lot of media outlets to actually use. And that was very concerning, and the libertarian socialists essentially just claimed it never happened. But we keep seeing this happen. These libertarian socialists, anarchists, they keep coming down on the side of U.S. imperialism. And we've seen this with the Hong Kong protests as well. That the Hong Kong protests obviously are nonsense. To say that Hong Kong is not China is absolute nonsense. They're literally Chinese people. They speak Chinese. Now, I know a lot of people lost their minds over that the last time I said it. Yes, they do speak Chinese. Both Cantonese and Mandarin are Chinese languages. And when I said Chinese, I meant those Chinese languages. I was using a specific term to refer to both languages under the umbrella of them both being Chinese. But then people wouldn't be able to nitpick things in order to be able to attack me. So, you've got what's a very clearly an anti-China force. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to claim that Hong Kong is not China. It doesn't make any sense to claim that China is being imperialist over Hong Kong. It's literally their own country. And there's no argument otherwise. And then it's frankly laughable when Hong Kong protesters talk about how they're going to they're supporting independence by waving the flag of another country, that being the United States and the UK. Because if anybody knows anything about allowing countries to be free from imperialism, it's the UK and the United States, right? But I digress. And again, anarchists openly support this because the idea is to hell with the government always, no matter what. And thus we see it playing into the U.S. hands of trying to cause instability inside of China. The Kurds sold themselves and very much prostituted themselves to the United States. And what is eventually going to happen to them is their fault. Now, the Kurds don't deserve to be wiped out. I don't believe that. But the hell that they're going to catch for doing it is on their own heads, because they were the ones that made that decision. Now, there's a very simple solution to this. Give the Kurds a semi-autonomous region under federalism, and you've got a peace plan right there. Nobody has to die. There doesn't have to be any conflict, etc. And I believe that Assad will eventually do that. That the Assad government will eventually make some kind of offer to the Kurdish people in order to put the country back together again. I think that's probably going to happen, and it's the right thing to do in this situation, because it's not as if the Kurds deserve to not have their own homeland. They certainly do, but the point is to do it in a way that doesn't undermine other people's homes as well, like the ethnic cleansing of areas that are occupied by the Kurds. Now, of course, the U.S. President Donald Trump decided to do this as an attempt to try to keep some of his campaign promises. He's going to say, look, we're not doing the wars, even though the wars are going on, and decided to continue the wars by scrapping the peace negotiations with the Taliban. Okay, I'm not really sure how that works in his mind, but you could say that of a lot of the things that he does. Now, I'm all for the United States pulling out of everywhere, completely. Primary contradiction is imperialism, and nobody can exercise their right to self-determination and even begin to build their own socialist government until the United States military leaves their countries. And that's why I support the U.S. pulling out of absolutely everywhere without really any exceptions. So what we have is a growing power block between Iran, Turkey, and Syria in this region. And that's why the U.S. mainstream political establishment is so opposed to it. That's why Lindsey Graham is coming out, why Adam Schiff is coming out against it, because they know they're losing their own interests by them pulling out and allowing a collection of those three particular countries, including Iraq, to work together to essentially liberate Syria, because Syria is going to ally with them and not with the United States. So in other words, the U.S. would be decreasing the influence that it has in the region. And I think that's a very important point to keep in mind there, which is why the U.S. mainstream political establishment is against it. So that's the gist of the situation that's going on with regards to the Kurds right now. And hopefully Turkey doesn't hurt them too much, although I'm sure Turkey's probably gonna go all out on this. I'm of the opinion that eventually the U.S. will go back and begin supporting the Kurds again. I believe that's going to happen because it's too much in their interest to do so. I mean, I'm glad the U.S. pulled out to this limited degree, but I think they're probably going to go back in within however long it is. I think eventually advisors are going to get to Trump and tell him that they need to go back in, but I think it's really only a matter of time until that happens.
Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.